We're back on site today at the McDowell-Phillips House, and today we're going to talk about the barns on the property. Now you have to remember, when this house was built in 1890, it was on the edge of town. So a house like this with a large family, they needed a place to store the carriage and the sleigh and their animals. So we're here with Historical Society President Brian Feron. We're looking at some of the changes on the barn. Brian, what do we know about these barns?
Well, we know they predate the 1890 house. We're pretty sure that they actually went with the H.D. Blake house that's to the south of the property, which originally sat where the McDowell house sits today. But judging by the condition of the beams and the exterior siding, these barns look to date before Civil War or in that era, 1850s or so. There's been many modifications to the barn over the years, including what we see as some shadow lines here from an extension at one time.
Yeah.
On the second floor, there's evidence of like a chicken coop loft or roost, and obviously inside indications of horses were there at one time, stalls. It's not a huge barn, but for a 1 or 2 horse carriage and family, it was probably adequate.
It's interesting, as we noticed last time walking around the house, you could see some of the changes that show the evolution of the home. So as Brian said, on the back of the barn you can see where there was another structure. We don't know exactly what it was. You can see the changes in the clapboard siding, some clearly much older than this here on our left. And then at the very top, there's these little cutouts. Were they for pigeons or dovecote? We don't quite know. But what's also kind of cool, as Brian said, this predates this house certainly and may date to Civil War period at least. When we looked at the other H.D. Blake house that was originally on this site, that was more of a Greek Revival house. And when you look at this barn, it also has elements of a Greek Revival style. So if you think of a temple or like the Parthenon from classical Greece, you can see those wide boards at the top, and that's kind of indicative of the style that was popular around 1840 to 1860. Brian, why don't we go inside and let's show the public some of those amazing pieces of wood on the siding on the inside. And we can talk a little bit about maybe how the barn was built and kind of for the future vision.
Sure. Let's come on in.
Here in the front of the barn, you can really get a sense of the age and the style. If we guess that the barn is roughly 180 years old, you would expect it to be a little bit crooked, and it is. But what's kind of fun is, again, to see the evolution with the doors. We have some that are regular carriage doors, one that's a sliding door, more of a loft-style door. So we're going to go inside and kind of check out the actual structure. So Brian, why don't you do the honors?
I'll just move this a little to the side.
All right, well, clearly this is an old barn. We have wonderful hand-hewn beams. You can see how it's changed over time, and let's take a look inside. So the renovation of the house itself has been a massive undertaking, and as we talked at our last visit, quite extraordinary. So phase 2 of the project is going to take place more on the grounds and really focus on these 2 barns. So Brian, again, on the inside of this barn, it's impressive when you look at the hand-hewn beams, and if you notice here, this is one board, over 2 feet wide at least. So we don't know where these came from. They may have been timbered right here off the site. But tell us a little bit about the vision for the barn, Brian, and kind of maybe some of the things that you've discovered inside here and what you hope to do.
Well, we have discovered some very interesting details. Some of the items from the barns we plan to repurpose. Our plan is, in the long run, to have a new structure or a revised structure here that has a little bit more accommodating to outdoor venues. But for now, as Matt pointed out, some of the architectural features of this barn are pretty cool. We have engraved dates and names. We have shadows of electricity that was here one time, actually a water pump at one time. So it was actually a very working barn. Upstairs, I mentioned, there's chicken coops and other storage that you normally find in a barn. So as we go forward with our plans to develop this property for venues, we would like to have some of these features repurposed into that new structure. Regrettably, the foundation of this particular barn is very weak and not stable. We've had several experts look at it to see if it could be salvaged, and both of them said it's really quite beyond that point, although, as we pointed out, there's a lot of strong elements that could be repurposed in a new structure, whether that's for decorative or to tell the history of how barns were built. These were post and beam constructions up top. As Matt pointed out, hand-hewn beams. It took a lot of work to construct the barn, and quite frankly, this was probably a decent-sized barn for its time.
Yeah.
Being kind of on the edge of the city, you had livery stables right down on Smith Road and all the way into town, so quite likely horse and carriages were used here frequently. And as we know, the sleigh and the other barn was used in the wintertime for the family to enjoy trips and junkets all the way into Akron or right across town to other families' properties. So it's pretty exciting to look at the different artifacts. We have discovered horseshoes, we've discovered old tools, old workbenches, old buckets, I mean things you would normally see in a barn. And it's just kind of interesting as we piece together this history that we're not eager to just throw things into the dumpster. We really want to save and repurpose whatever we can to tell the story of not only this barn, but the importance of agriculture in Medina County, which is something that I hope with a new structure we'll be able to feature that quite a bit, because to me that's a very important element of our history, and most people moving to this area in present day don't realize that probably 80% of the families in Medina County were related to agriculture, and it was such an important industry, and having the railroad right here with the A.I. Root Company, crops could get to the market. We had the interurban electric car right outside the back of this property, so goods could move pretty easily in and out of other cities, and so I think it's going to be a pretty cool addition to the property.
Yeah, why don't we go take a look at the second barn on the property, which probably dates more to the time of the house. Also housed the carriage and the sleigh that have been restored by the Historical Society. We'll hear a little bit about how they plan to use that structure, and then we're going to take a look inside. So here we are in the second barn in the property, or what might be today called a garage. We're not quite sure when this was built or why it was built. What's kind of cool is again, reading the space. So if you look at the back wall, you can see that a beam from a much older structure was repurposed as part of the footer for this, and that goes around the side. One of the really curious things about this structure is this tin insulated room. Don't really know the purpose of it. It's a large space. Brian said perhaps it could have been ice storage, it could have been meat storage. There's stamped on the inside, what does that say, Brian?
Berry and Ritter, which
Berry
was
and
a tin
Ritter.
shop right on the square, off the square.
Okay.
South Court Street.
So stamped Medina, Ohio, so made local, still doing that 130 years later. So Brian, what's the future for this building? How will the Historical Society use this space?
Well, this barn we were fortunate could be salvaged without a tremendous investment. The first thing we did was remove a very uneven concrete floor. For years there were no doors on this barn, so water just flowed right in and eventually deteriorated the floor. But fortunately most of the posts are structurally sound. Upstairs it's most post and beam construction, and going forward we want to bring back the carriage and sleigh that we had restored from this family a few years ago. Actually, we pulled the sleigh and carriage out of this side of the barn about 5 years ago, and they were total wrecks. We thought we were crazy, but we ran a campaign to raise money to have them restored, and now they're both beautiful pieces, and they really show the care that can be done to an old place, and that's why not only preserving the house and property, but now we're going to be able to show you artifacts the family actually used in early transportation. The carriage is about 7.5 feet tall. It doesn't retract a roof, so we had to make sure the doors, when we rebuild, are wide enough to accommodate the carriage and tall enough to accommodate it, as well as the sleigh. And we're just real excited in the next few weeks as we complete the restructuring of the front of the barn, reface it, create new swing out doors close to the original design as we can best estimate. And then we're going to have a really nice building that's dry, what I call varmint proof, and we'll make sure that the carriage and sleigh is well kept. It's interesting, the inside was totally lined with tongue and groove siding.
It's very nice.
Somebody put a lot of effort into what we would consider just a normal garage.
Right.
The auditor's site seems to indicate this was built around 1920, but after looking upstairs we feel this might have been a smaller barn that actually had an addition put on. And as the family's transportation needs changed, no doubt the carriage was narrow, cars were much wider and longer.
Sure.
They probably needed a bigger area. We do know down the road that Blake McDowell had a 1912 Cadillac.
Okay.
Which I would love to, I wish I would have left that here.
Probably a big car.
That was a big car, a big open touring car. So it would have been quite awkward to get it into a space,
Sure.
and I'm sure he would have wanted it protected.
Yeah.
Although by that time he was actually living on Court Street at the Windy Hill Farm, the place he built. But nevertheless, I'm sure Mrs. McDowell or Bessie had some vehicle to get around in.
Sure, to get around town.
It's fortunate the one picture we have of the Blake house before it was moved has the actual carriage and horse tethered to a hitching post right out front. And it's a very interesting photograph.
Yeah.
That it really helped us make sure we had the right carriage attached to the family.
Right,
and we
right.
do. So all those things part of history, making sure we get it right. And that's what we want the community to know. We're taking our time as we're going through these barns to get them built right, to stabilize them so they're here for many, many years. A new concrete floor was put down a week ago, and that's really helped with the drainage issues. And the carpenters will start on the reconstruction here in another week or so. And I think it's going to look pretty grand when it's done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't we go inside and take a look at some of the work that's been ongoing in there, and some of the cleaning and sorting, and kind of get a sense of the vision for the inside as well.
Sure.
So we're in the dining room of the McDowell-Phillips house, and you can see it's been redecorated over time. But what's kind of cool is looking around the room, the original leaded glass windows looking out over Blake Street, correct? Mm-hmm. Correct. And then this gorgeous fireplace mantel that's in the room. And what's kind of cool is if you look at the curves of this, it very often mimics the shingle style architecture of the outside. It has these beautiful square blue tiles, which is a little bit unusual that the fireplaces in this house have square tiles rather than a rectangle, which was common. And then this hand-carved salve here. And Brian, what does this mean?
Salve is Latin for welcome or friendship.
So this was the gathering place, the heart of the home where people would gather for meals and break bread. So, this is the McDowell saying welcome to the family. Brian, what's the vision for this room? What are the plans for renovation?
Well, this room really was the heartbeat of the McDowell family. In bio, which is Mrs. McDowell's nickname, in her Christmas notes, the table would be expanded to seat at least 16. The family gatherings really hovered around the dining room, as most of our families do.
Sure.
Eating became a tradition, and when this house was built for gracious entertaining, the dining room was made quite large for that purpose.
Yeah.
And I think the family utilized this quite often during holiday celebrations. As we found through the family notes left behind, when families had gatherings, they didn't come for a few hours, they came for a few days. So you had to be able to feed these people. Bio actually had a buzzer on the floor to summon a maid, so that's a little, we see some shadow marks in the floor.
Yeah.
That probably was. And so this will be really our grand reception room, probably used for the same purpose.
Sure.
As we have events here, we'll certainly welcome our guests with food. Our future plans would include having teas or perhaps some other themed dinners featuring the beautiful dining room. This particular table has about 10 leaves to it, so it grows quite large, and I can see why it was such an important piece in furniture that the family left with the house.
Yeah.
It really served a great purpose, and you notice it's extra wide as well.
Sure.
So we expect this table is going to see a lot of use in the future.
That's fantastic. Now notice there are radiators in the home. Is it steam heat or hot water heat?
Hot water heat,
Okay.
very comfortable heat. It's very steady heat.
Yeah.
And during this past winter while we were working in here, it was almost too warm. So I kept lowering the thermostat.
It's a constant, sure. Why don't we take a peek in this room behind us, which is fascinating to me because I think it's changed a little bit and we're still not quite sure what it was originally. But let's go in there and see what's taking place. So for me, this is one of my favorite rooms in the house just because it's kind of quirky. I think on the original blueprints, Brian, you said it was marked as a den. Is that correct?
Yes, the blueprints show this as a den. Could have been a library with the view up the Washington Street.
Yeah.
Perhaps Mr. McDowell liked this room
So this could have been R.M. McDowell's hangout space. This was his office at the time, perhaps. What's really cool about this is this beautiful fireplace mantel with these very traditional, almost medieval-looking hinges. Again, the square tiles around the fireplace is a bit unusual. But what's interesting is this room changed a little bit when the house was turned into the apartments. So we were just in the dining room, which is through this archway here. So this arch was added when this was turned into the dining room, and originally there would have been just one way in and one way out off of the main entrance here. So Brian, what's kind of the vision for this room? Tell me about some of the work that's already been done and what you hope to achieve.
Well, this room required quite a bit of plaster repair. The ceilings look great, but they required quite a bit of, the plaster had become loose over time, and you've noticed the arch curves in the ceilings and the coving, which was really complicated to fix.
Sure.
But we had Carl Hatcher plastering from Hudson. He specializes in old structures. So he spent about 2 weeks going through the house and various ceiling repairs, buttoning up the plaster, taking it down to the wood lath where it was necessary, and rebuilding it. And this room required quite a bit of work, but the ceiling turned out beautiful. And our vision for this room, we believe it would be more of a settee, a sitting room.
Sure. Okay.
We have this beautiful Millennium Instrument that was just recently donated to the society.
Gorgeous.
This dates to Civil War times, and it's a beautiful piece.
Was it a local piece?
Yes, a local Medina County piece. These were actually built in Akron.
Oh, wow.
And so the family's had it their whole history. In fact, they even gave us the original cover as well as the documentation as to who received it and how. So that was really cool, and it's just a brand new piece. We also have a secretary that we discovered in the basement that belonged to Florence Hughes.
Okay.
It's a large bookshelf secretary with a flip-down desk. We're thinking this might be the kind of the correspondence room. Maybe
sure.
We have a small upholstered love seat and 2 side chairs, which is for informal meetings or just general relaxing, perhaps a little music.
Yeah.
So this room, as you said, is a pretty cool room. According to the family notes, it was one of the more popular rooms because it was so warm in the wintertime. You have a fireplace plus the radiator. And so you didn't have to go very far for heat. So I could see why it was probably a popular place for people to hang out. It wasn't as perhaps drafty as the rest of the house.
And I think you made an important point that I'm not sure we said in the first episode. Part of the other reason for the acquisition of this property is because you're kind of busting at the seams at the John Smart House. So this gives you additional space for archives and collections and accessions of really important pieces that otherwise you may have had to turn away from the society.
Correct. We reluctantly decline many nice items every year as families grow or parents' homes need to be cleaned.
Sure.
People often think of giving items to us, and unfortunately at the John Smart House we're just simply so full we can't take in anymore. And yet we have a beautiful offer like this that came to us about a month ago.
Yeah.
It's a perfect piece for a house of this vintage, and so we hope that over time we've now created enough space that we can add items to our collection to tell the story of the county history, perhaps even taking it up decades into the 20s, 30s, and of course all the way up into our generations, 50s, 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
At some point people are going to want to study that era just as much as we're keen on
vintage becomes
our
historic.
ancestors' days. So the house is going to lend itself very well. One nice feature of this house, it has much more wall space than the John Smart House.
True. Yeah.
Most Victorians were cut up pretty doors, windows. This house has a great deal of wall space, so we have many interesting photos. We are thinking of that H.G. Blake and his wife Elizabeth's portraits might end up in this room.
Oh, that would be cool.
Because he was, although he didn't live here, he was such a driving influence, and of course his daughter and son-in-law live here. We may move the Blakes here and have a room with a lot of their memorabilia, which we have a great deal of that in our archives we've already discovered in this house. Fortunately, his congressional records, his Civil War records,
it's amazing.
It all followed the family, and they didn't throw any of it away. So it'll take us several years to go through all that.
Yeah, cool. Why don't we go take a look at the staircase and that beautiful stained glass window?
Sure.
So here we are on the staircase inside the house, and what's kind of unique is Generally, the staircase is the feature focus of any home. This one is a little bit interesting that it's kind of hidden around the side off of the entrance hall, but it still has amazing, beautiful carved details and wooden structure that is very similar to the shingle style. But I think one of the most glorious parts of this house is this amazing stained glass window that's up above us. Brian, I know there was a fire in the house. Can you tell me a little bit about the window and maybe what happened to it and how it's been fixed, as far as you know?
As far as we know, it started, we found the original receipt for the window. It was $115 from the Cleveland Glass Works in 1892, which was probably the year as the house was finished, it was being installed.
Right.
Interestingly enough, the majority of the fire damage in the attic was directly above us, and there is some slight warpage on the window, which we're guessing could have been caused by the heat.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, the window remained intact throughout the fire, remarkably. And it's just a beautiful piece. And it certainly will be one of our feature elements of the house. When we finish our electrical upgrades, we hope to have some backlighting so it's visible from the street at night, and it'll really show off nice. It's just a beautiful piece, very large. And
it really is pretty glorious with the different jewels and gems and the colors in it.
The seashell design in the middle of the lower panel also carries over to the stenciling in the formal
that's right.
entryway. And you'll see that shell design not only on the wallpaper, but also in imprints in the plaster
up in the top
of the beams. So it's kind of interesting. They, again, they did spend time in the East. Maybe the ocean theme was appealing to the McDowells, and their children studied in the East, so they're probably influenced maybe by Maine or the ocean or the Connecticut family.
It's also very classical.
It is. It's a beautiful piece.
One of the fun things, or one of the things that I love most about working old houses, is when you really get into the deconstruction and the renovation, you start to see clues and little bits of pieces of the past that maybe tell you that there was a piece of trim that was removed, maybe something was changed, sometimes whole doorways were covered over. But here, while they were working on the doors and doing the shellac, Farrell found a really cool but kind of weird nod to the past. So Brian, tell us a little bit about this random hole in the door that was discovered.
Well, the last set of doors to be done in this room were the pocket doors, and when they were open, Farrell McHugh made an interesting observation. At the floor level, there was a hole, which he said is kind of odd.
Yeah.
Being down there was no electrical connections or anything like that would have necessitated a hole. But when he saw it protrude to the outside of the other side of the door, he recognized that's a bullet hole. And so, him being he was a specialist in the Army and quite familiar with weapons.
Right.
He said it had to be at least a 44 or 45 caliber bullet to penetrate wood that solid and make that clean of an entry point. So he fashioned a dowel rod, which he just happened to have in the basement here, and he stuck it in the hole and saw, if you look at the trajectory of the bullet hole, it goes right about to the middle of the parlor.
Yeah.
Where someone was standing and either accidentally discharged a firearm or perhaps some other nefarious reasons that we don't know. But it's a very interesting discovery, though. Just make the docents have a very interesting tale. It obviously isn't something we're going to fix. We'd like it to talk about that. But it's really an interesting observation as to what happened that someone would have had a gun right in the formal parlor of the McDowell house. And
it went off.
How did it go off?
Sure.
These were trained military men from the Civil War era that certainly were familiar with weapons. At least Mr. McDowell was. Perhaps somebody else over the years accidentally discharged a firearm or was cleaning the gun, but I can't imagine Mrs. McDowell allowing someone to have a firearm in her parlor.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but it makes for an interesting
It does. It's one of those things, we'll never have the answer, but it's a fun little detail, and again, part of the history of this house.
So when you tour the house, we'll make sure we point out the bullet hole, and we'll have some docents talk a little bit more about how we discovered it.
So today we're visiting with Farrell, who's been working on the woodwork in, I guess what we're calling the back parlor?
Yes.
Kind of off the formal parlor. So Farrell, I know you've spent a lot of time working on the woodwork and this gorgeous fireplace, bringing it back. Tell us a little bit about the process of what you're doing in here, if you would.
Okay, thanks. The original product on the fireplace was called shellac, and it's a nice 19th century product, although we still use it today.
Yeah.
And the catalyst in it was good old alcohol, moonshine alcohol. They put a poison in it so no one drinks it, but that was the most important thing. And then you would put a nice wax on it, a furniture wax on top of it.
Yeah.
And as long as you kept it up, it would last forever. There's places where Shakespeare had plays where the woodwork is still perfect.
Really?
Yeah, in England, of course. But
Okay.
the trouble is, modern people don't necessarily have the time to wax their furniture once a week.
Right.
So we went to the polyurethanes and the urethanes, and that was
So what is shellac? So you have a can here. What is shellac made of?
Shellac comes from a little bug, the lac bug.
Okay.
And the shell is actually ground up. It's made into a real fine powder. It can
Hence
come,
the name, shellac.
Shellac.
Completely original there.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the catalyst again is alcohol in it.
Okay.
And it forms a natural product that goes right into the wood and becomes a part of the wood as a layer.
Okay.
And then it absorbs wax very, very well, which is again usually the better waxes that come from plants. And it gives a real nice shine.
Okay.
Again, with the Victorians, they wanted a glossy shine in the room because the light sources were so dim. You know, candles,
Yeah.
oil lamps, that sort of thing. So that would reflect back in the room.
Okay. So we can see the mantle you've been working on is beautiful and shiny, has that rich color. And then there's this casework over here. So is this has not been done yet?
This has not been done yet. And again, it's banged up and a little dirty, but it's dull.
Yeah.
And people look at a Victorian house, and what they see is you know, kind of like a dull, gray, dingy kind of house, but that's not how the people lived in
Right.
Victorian eras. Especially in an upper class house like this, everything was bright. You know, it shined, it reflected the light, there were vivid colors.
Yeah.
And again, once I'm able to do this, you'll see this woodwork will match this, and again, very, very reflective of the light in the house.
And it's interesting hearing you say that and kind of the whole project in the house. Is it preservation? Is it restoration? So what you're doing to me is restoring. You're bringing this woodwork back.
Yeah, I want it back to exactly where it was at the time. Now again, maybe if it was Thomas Jefferson's house, maybe you would say, well, no, we don't want to touch it. We want to save the patina. That's a great word
To
with
show the
antique
age,
people
right,
now,
right.
to show the age. But this is going to be a theme house that shows how the Victorians lived.
Yeah.
And they didn't live in grungy, dark, dusty old houses. They lived in very, very modern, to their time.
That's true. So the brass will be polished, the woodwork will shine.
The woodwork will shine.
And it will be as if you're in the early 1890s.
as most close as we can get it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Now I know some of the other work taking place, working on the windows. These have recently been painted. The new sash
Yeah, we
cords
put
and
new
weights put
sashes
in.
These windows in this room will all work. They'll all be going up and down, as they did in those days. They're nice and tightly sealed. And again, people think that because they go into an old house and the windows rattle and moan, well, that's because they haven't been taken care of.
Right.
So with the crew outside and me inside, we've been able to get these windows up to where they're reasonably weatherproof.
That is a massive window frame. Original hardware.
Yeah, everything's original except the weights are original. I replaced all the ropes, or most of the ropes that were bad.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Farrell, thank you for sharing what you've been doing, and we look forward to seeing this room
Okay,
complete.
great. All I got to do is live long enough to do the rest of the house.
Well, we hope that
I hope
happens.
so too.
Join us next time as we learn more about the massive undertaking by the Medina County Historical Society to restore and preserve and represent the historic McDowell-Phillips House to our community. Thanks for joining us.